The sun wasn't just beating down, it was a physical assault, a molten hammer pounding the cracked and buckled asphalt of Ciudad Juárez into submission. The air didn't shimmer, it writhed, a suffocating, tangible curtain of heat that stole the breath and coated the throat with grit. In the meager, shifting shade of an alley wall crumbling like ancient bone, Antonio Vargas huddled. He wasn't just wiry. He was a specter of his former self, ribs stark beneath the thin, sweat-sodden cotton of a shirt that was more whole than fabric. His cheeks were caverns, sculpted by relentless hunger, and his eyes, deep-set, shadowed pools, held a terrifying vacancy, the numb exhaustion of a man perpetually hunted by circumstance. Tremors, unrelated to the heat, ran through his frame. Clutched against his thudding heart was the meager prize, a loaf of stale bread, hard as brick, stolen in a blur of terrified motion from a market stall moments before. It wasn't the act of theft that sent icy dread coiling through his gut, chilling him despite the furnace air. It was the paralyzing certainty that unseen eyes had tracked his desperation. He knew the rhythm of flight, the taste of panic. But this time, the terror had a name, a face, Amelia, his 12-year-old daughter. She waited, small and frighteningly quiet, in the stifling darkness beneath a greasy tarp stretched behind a derelict, rust-streaked warehouse. She was the fragile ember of his world, the only light left in a life choked by shadow. The memory of her eyes, huge and luminous in her gaunt face, the silent plea beneath the brave little smile she tried to muster, the dry, persistent cough that rattled her slight frame. These images were the flint that sparked his reckless act. The gnawing void in her belly had become a physical pain in his own, driving him past fear, past reason. Antonio pressed his back against the rough, sun-baked brick, the heat searing even through his thin shirt. He dared a sliver of a glance around the corner. The market plaza pulsed with chaotic life, a cacophony of vendors' strident cries hawking overripe fruit and dubious meats, the metallic clang of carts jostling, the pungent smells of spice, sweat, and decay mingling into a thick, nauseating perfume. His gaze, honed by years of hypervigilance, sliced through the throng, instantly locking onto the predator. At the plaza's far end, beneath the skeletal branches of a dead tree, idled a van the color of dried blood. Black, windowless, radiating menace. Two men leaned against its grimy flank. Their posture screamed casual indifference, but their eyes were restless hawks, scanning, assessing, predatory. Los Cuervos. The name alone was a curse whispered in terror. They ruled this festering corner of Juárez not with authority, but with terror, their cruelty legendary, their punishments theatrical displays of barbarity. Antonio had witnessed their handiwork, the broken, discarded things left in alleyways that used to be men. Thieves, especially those foolish enough to steal from them, met ends whispered about in nightmares. His stomach clenched violently, bile rising in his throat. One of the men, thick-necked and heavy-shouldered, a cruel scar like a lightning bolt tearing down his left cheek, shifted. His hand lifted, not casually, but with deliberate intent, a thick finger pointing unerringly towards Antonio's shadowed refuge. Recognition, cold and absolute, flooded Antonio. They'd seen him. Adrenaline, pure and electric, burned through his exhaustion. He exploded from the alley mouth, the stale loaf clamped desperately under his arm like a fragile football. The narrow passage became a dizzying smear of grime-streaked walls, overflowing bins reeking of rot and decay, abandoned, skeletal bicycles, the stench of urine and hopelessness thick in his nostrils. Behind him, the van's engine roared to obscene life, a guttural beast awakening. Tires shrieked on the hot pavement as it lurched forward, gouging into the alley's confines. Antonio's bare feet slapped against the burning concrete, each impact jolting up his legs. His lungs were twin bellows filled with fire, searing with each ragged gasp. He veered sharply, plunging into a gap barely wider than his shoulders between two leaning tenements. a labyrinth of decaying brick and despair where the van couldn't follow. But the men could. Their shouts echoed, bouncing off the close walls, inhuman sounds of pursuit and promised violence. The heavy, rhythmic thud of boots pounding concrete grew louder, closer, a drumbeat of doom. Asterisk core, pequeñarada. Asterisk run, little rat. The mocking voice, thick with malice and amusement, sliced through the air. You think you can nibble at our crumbs and scurry away? We feast on rats like you. Antonio's legs screamed in protest, muscles burning, threatening to buckle. But then he saw her, Amelia's face, pale and drawn, the hollows beneath her eyes, the way her slight shoulders shook with that wretched cough. The image was a whip crack driving him forward. He ducked under a sagging clothesline strung with faded rags, bursting into a cramped, sun-baked courtyard where women froze, clutching bundles of washing, their eyes wide with fear as the gangsters' enraged shouts filled the confined space. He zigzagged past them, a desperate hare. Hope flared for a second. The alley's opposite end was clear. Then, with a sickening lurch, the black van screeched into view, blocking the narrow exit like a monstrous beetle. 3 men tumbled out, their laughter harsh and guttural, spreading out with practiced ease, cutting off his avenues of escape. The scarred leader, his face a mask of cold amusement, drew not a gun, but a long, wicked machete. The afternoon sun glinted malevolently off the polished steel. You have a taste for what belongs to us, ladrón, the leader sneered, his voice a low rasp. He spun the blade in his hand with casual, terrifying expertise. Let us educate you. Show the little rat the cost of his hunger, boys. Antonio stumbled back, his shoulders hitting unforgiving brick. Trapped, his eyes darted frantically, searching the sheer walls, the cluttered dead end, finding only the advancing wall of malice. The gangsters closed a circle, their grins widening, feral and hungry. The first blow wasn't a punch. It was a piston-driven hammer of a fist smashing deep into his solar plexus. All breath exploded from his lungs in a silent, agonized wheeze. He folded double, the world graying at the edges. The stale bread tumbled from his nerveless fingers, crushed instantly under heavy, deliberate boots. A booted foot, swung with brutal force, connected with his ribs. A sickening crack echoed in his own skull as he was lifted off his feet, crashing onto the filthy ground, dust filling his mouth. Before he could even gasp, the machete flashed, a silver arc descending with terrible speed. White-hot agony erupted in his left arm as the blade bit deep, grating against bone. His scream tore from his throat, raw and primal, drowned instantly by their roaring laughter. This wasn't execution. It was butchery, a slow, sadistic dissection of hope. The scarred leader crouched, bringing his face level with Antonio's. The man's breath smelled of cheap tobacco and decay. "Beg," he commanded, his voice a venomous whisper. "Beg for the miserable scrap of life you stole, Rada. Grovel. Maybe we make it quick. Maybe." Antonio spat, a thick gob of blood and dirt landing near the leader's boot. His vision swam, paint a red tide threatening to drown him. But defiance, born of a love fiercer than fear, flared in his dimming eyes. His voice was a shattered rasp, but the words were clear, absolute. "For my daughter, I'd steal 1,000 loaves. I'd do it again." The amusement vanished from the leader's scarred face, replaced by cold, murderous fury. The machete lifted high, blotting out the harsh sun. The world didn't just go black. It imploded into silent, infinite night. 15 years later, the dust of the same plaza tasted the same, gritty, metallic, the taste of forgotten promises and spilled blood. Amelia Vargas stood rigid at its edge, the chaotic symphony of the market washing over her. The same strident vendors, the same clattering carts, the same desperate energy humming beneath the surface. Time had layered grime on the buildings, deepened the cracks in the pavement, but the soul of the place remained unchanged, a relentless arena where survival was the only prize. At 27, the frail, terrified child who had waited in vain under a stinking tarp was gone. In her place stood Lieutenant Amelia Vargas. Her police uniform was a crisp, dark blue armor, the badge on her chest polished to a hard gleam, reflecting the harsh sunlight. Yet her eyes, a deep, unsettling brown, held a grief so profound it had become part of her structure, etched into the lines around them, a permanent shadow. Her fingers rose automatically, tracing the cool, tarnished metal of the small locket resting against her sternum beneath the uniform. Her father's final gift, given when she was 6 and the world still held color. Inside, the faded photograph showed a man with kind eyes and a little girl beaming, a moment of impossible peace frozen in time. The memory of that endless night was a phantom limb, aching constantly. She'd waited, the gnawing hunger turning into a sharp, sickening pain, long after the stars faded and the gray light of dawn crept under the tarp. Then came the searching, a small, frantic ghost calling Papa into indifferent alleys, until a woman selling wilted flowers, her eyes pools of pity, had pulled her aside. The whispered words, the chase, the black van, the blood staining the dirt, had carved themselves onto Amelia's soul. The official report, random gang violence. Homeless casualty. Case closed. Antonio Vargas became another anonymous statistic in Juarez's ledger of despair, buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. But Amelia had seen the truth in the flower seller's averted gaze. In a way, the market crowd fell silent when Los Cuervos were mentioned. The gang had murdered her father for a crust of bread, and the police, the very institution meant to protect, had been their silent partners. Her ascent through the ranks of the Chihuahua State Police had been a brutal, solitary war waged within a system steeped in rot. She hadn't joined out of naive idealism, but driven by a white-hot core of vengeance, forged in the cold ashes of her childhood. Every case meticulously built, every lowlife hauled in, every corrupt thread painstakingly pulled, was a brick laid on the path toward the men who had destroyed her world. Yet, Los Cuervos thrived like a cancer, their roots deep in the city's corrupted soil, nurtured by cops on their payroll and politicians who found their blind spots conveniently large. For years, Amelia had moved in the shadows, collecting fragments of truth, terrified whispers from informants met in stinking back rooms, grainy surveillance photos, fragments of incriminating conversations snatched from tapped phones. She knew their hierarchy, the cold-eyed bosses, the brutal enforcers, their rat-hole hideouts, their methods steeped in cruelty. And she knew, with chilling certainty, the names and faces of the police who shielded them. Today, she occupied the plaza not as a grieving daughter, but as a poised predator. Her team, a tight-knit unit of 5 officers she'd meticulously vetted, chosen for their stubborn, almost foolish adherence to the oath they'd sworn, waited in an unmarked panel van 2 streets over. Months of perilous undercover work, navigating a minefield of departmental betrayal, had led here. They were tracking Los Cuervos' most significant operation in months, a massive shipment of pure methamphetamine, destined for the lucrative chaos across the U.S. border. Her direct superior, Captain Raul Mendoza, was one of the few brass not visibly tainted, a weary man carrying his own burdens. Even he had pulled her aside, his voice low with genuine concern. "Amelia, this is the hornet's nest. You're poking it with a very sharp stick. Los Cuervos, their tendrils reach high. Very high." His warning hung heavy, but Amelia's resolve was diamond hard. She'd seen the trail of broken bodies, addicts discarded like trash, rival dealers executed in their homes, innocent bystanders caught in spray-and-pray crossfires. She'd listened to the hollow-eyed testimonies of families shattered, of young girls vanished into the gang's trafficking networks, of men like her father slaughtered for sport or a moment's amusement. Tonight, the reckoning began. A soft, static-laden crackle sounded in her earpiece. "Lieutenant, target acquired." Officer Daniela Torres's voice, tight with controlled tension, whispered. Black van, plates match the intel. Turning into the yard of the old Durango Street warehouse. Confirmed visual. Copy, Torres. Maintain visual. Hold position. Absolute radio silence until my mark. Amelia replied, her own voice a calm counterpoint to the adrenaline singing in her veins. She adjusted the weight of her Kevlar vest beneath her uniform jacket, a familiar, constricting embrace. Her hand brushed the grip of her holstered Beretta in 92 FS, its weight a cold comfort, a constant companion since her first day on patrol. The warehouse, a crumbling, graffiti-scarred monolith from Juarez's industrial corpse, was a known Cuervo fortress, a hub for storing their poison and cutting deals steeped in blood. She had a warrant, signed by a judge she prayed wasn't also on the take, but she knew its paper shield was flimsy. Raids went wrong. Evidence vanished. Cops who asked too many questions ended up in morgues or ditches. But she was ready. Years of obsessive preparation had mapped every conceivable scenario. Their guard rotations, their hidden exits, their panic protocols, the names of their protectors within the precinct walls. The drive to Calle Durango was a 10-minute blur of neon signs and decaying buildings, the city's pulse thrumming against the windshield. Inside the car, the only sound was Amelia's own steady breathing and the ghost of her father's voice. She could hear it, soft but unwavering, promising a warmth she could barely remember. One day, Mija, you'll see. A real home. With a garden, maybe. Safe. That fragile dream had died screaming in a dusty alley. But from its ashes, Amelia had forged a new one. Cold, hard justice. Not just for Antonio Vargas, but for every nameless soul Los Cuervos had crushed beneath their boots. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the bruised twilight sky. Windows were boarded with rotten plywood, gang tags, crude depictions of snarling crows, splashed across its rusted flanks like obscene graffiti. Amelia's team parked silently a block away, melting into the gathering dusk like wraiths. The black van sat near the main loading doors, engine ticking as it cooled. 2 sentries leaned against its hood, Kalashnikovs slung casually over their shoulders. Their posture radiated bored arrogance, but their eyes constantly scanned the desolate street. Amelia's breath hitched. One of them, taller, thick-set, with a familiar jagged scar slicing down his cheekbone like a crack in porcelain. Hector El Cuervo Salazar, the enforcer, the butcher, the man whispered to have led the hunt that ended her father's life. The scar was his brand, a confirmation that seared through years of carefully maintained control. Torres, Gomez, cover the rear loading dock and secondary exits. Amelia breathed in her throat mic, her voice barely a whisper. Ramirez, your point with me. Silent approach. Weapons tight. Lights and sirens stay dark. If they rabbit, Gomez, Torres, funnel them towards a north alley choke point. Ramirez and I will flush. The orders were crisp, rehearsed 100 times in her mind. Her team moved with lethal grace, shadows among shadows, their movements honed by years surviving Juarez's streets where hesitation was a death sentence. Amelia and Officer Ramirez, a solid, reliable presence, crept along the warehouse's grimy front wall, using the bulk of a rusted, overflowing dumpster for cover. The guards were distracted, sharing a cigarette, their low laughter carrying on the still air. Salazar blew a plume of smoke, gesturing dismissively at something his companion said. Oblivious. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the Kevlar, but her hands, gripping her service weapon, were rock steady. She locked eyes with Ramirez, nodded fractionally towards the guard on the left. A silent count. Asterisk 1. 2. Asterisk they move as 1. Ramirez was a blur, closing the distance in 3 silent strides, his arms snaking around the left guard's neck in a brutal chokehold, cutting off sound and breath. Simultaneously, Amelia surged forward, driving the reinforced polymer heel of her palm straight into the second guard's temple with surgical precision. Both men crumpled soundlessly to the ground, disarmed and secured with zip ties before their cigarettes hit the pavement. Inside, the warehouse was a cavernous tomb, vast and echoing. Weak, flickering fluorescent tubes cast long, dancing shadows, barely piercing the gloom. Towering stacks of wooden crates, shrouded in dusty tarpaulins, formed labyrinthine corridors. The air hung thick and acrid, a chemical stench that burned the nostrils. The unmistakable reek of methamphetamine cooking, the gang's lifeblood. Voices echoed from deeper within, a mix of guttural Spanish and the sharp, coded slang of the streets. Amelia signaled Ramirez to peel off to the right flank. She moved forward, her boots making no sound on the concrete floor, every sense straining. She followed the sound, weaving silently between the crate canyons. In a cleared space near the warehouse's heart, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a frayed cord, 5 men clustered around a scarred metal table. Bundles of cash, brick-like packages wrapped in plastic, and an assortment of pistols and knives littered its surface. And there he stood, back to her initially, barking orders in a voice like gravel. Hector Salazar. The machete hung at his hip, its worn leather sheath a grotesque fashion statement. Seeing it, knowing it was likely the very blade that had ended her father's life, ignited a white-hot fury in Amelia's chest, so intense it threatened to consume her focus. She forced it down, locking it away in an iron vault. Not yet. Her team would be converging. She needed the trap sprung cleanly. She raised her hand, fingers splayed, the signal to hold position. Asterisk wait. Wait for the perfect containment. Asterisk. Then, fate twisted. Behind her, a loose stack of empty crates shifted. A single dry, splintering crack echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. Salazar's head snapped around, his hand instinctively flying to the machete's hilt. His eyes, scanning the shadows, locked onto the movement near the crates Amelia had just passed. Asterisk. Quien anda ahi? Asterisk who's there? He snarled, the lazy arrogance replaced by instant, dangerous alertness. His men reacted with lethal speed, hands diving for weapons on the table. Hesitation was death. Amelia didn't think. She acted. Asterisk, asterisk, go. Go, go. Asterisk, asterisk. Her command shattered the silence, raw and powerful. Instantly, her team erupted from their concealment like avenging shadows. Policía, drop your weapons. On the ground. Now, asterisk, asterisk. Chaos detonated. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Muzzle flashes strobed like malevolent lightning, bullets whining off metal crates, splintering wood, ricocheting with deadly whines. Amelia dove sideways behind a stack of heavy boxes, the impact jarring her shoulder. She returned fire, controlled bursts, aiming low for legs, her training overriding the primal urge for lethal force. Through the staccato roar, she saw Salazar bolt, not towards the front, but towards a small, reinforced side door. Torres was there, her weapon trained, shouting commands. Salazar didn't slow. He yanked the machete free in a single fluid motion, its blade catching the weak light. He swung it in a wide, terrifying arc, forcing Torres to stumble back. Before he could follow through, Gomez, a mountain of a man, slammed into him from the blind side, driving him face first into the concrete with crushing force. The machete clattered away. The other gangsters were less fortunate. One went down screaming, clutching a bullet-shattered knee. Another froze, hands instinctively rising. A third made a break for it, only to be tackled hard by Ramirez. Within 2 minutes, the violent symphony ended as abruptly as it began. The warehouse floor was littered with groaning men, disarmed and subdued. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed sickeningly with the chemical stench. Amelia stood over Salazar, her beretta unwavering, aimed at the center of his broad back as Gomez wrenched his arms behind him for cuffing. Salazar twisted his head, spitting blood and concrete dust. His eyes, when they met hers, burned with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You stupid puta!" he rasped, his voice thick with pain and fury. "You think this means anything? You think you win? We are the city. We own the shadows. We own the cops. You're already dead. You just don't know it. Not anymore," Amelia stated, her voice devoid of inflection, colder than the steel of her gun. She stepped closer, the toe of her boot near his face. She knelt, bringing her eyes level with his, forcing him to see her fully. 15 years ago. A crumbling alley not 5 blocks from here. A man, stealing bread so his child wouldn't starve. You hunted him. You murdered him. Slowly, cruelly. His name was Antonio Vargas. She paused, letting the name hang in the gunpowder-laden air. "He was my father." Salazar's defiant sneer faltered. A flicker of something, not remorse, perhaps recognition, maybe just surprise, crossed his brutal features. His bloodshot eyes widened fractionally. "You?" he choked out, disbelief warring with dawning understanding. Asterisk is asterisk, kid? The little rat's whelp? Amelia offered no confirmation, no satisfaction. She stood, turning her back on him as Gomez hauled the cursing man to his feet. Her movements were precise, automatic, securing her weapon, directing her team to secure evidence and call for prisoner transport. Outside, the cool night air felt like a balm on her flushed skin. She touched the locket beneath her shirt. It felt heavier than lead, a lodestone of memory and purpose. The hunt, for this chapter at least, was over. But the war? The war felt like it had only just begun. The days and weeks that followed were a relentless vortex. The raid became a seismic event in Juárez, splashed across headlines nationally. Corruption nests smashed. Gang leaders, cops nabbed in daring raid. Amelia's meticulously compiled evidence. Years of encrypted files, coded ledgers, voice recordings, corroborated informant testimonies became the detonator. It implicated not just Salazar and his immediate thugs, but dozens within the police force. Beat cops taking regular protection, payments, detectives deliberately botching investigations, sergeants running interference, and names higher up the food chain than she'd dared hope. Captain Mendoza stood firm beside her, a rock in the swirling sewage, leveraging his own strained credibility to ensure the case moved relentlessly towards prosecution. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Anonymous calls hissed threats into her phone at all hours. Crude, menacing notes appeared on her windshield. The weight of unseen enemies pressed in from all sides. She moved with constant vigilance, her Beretta always within reach, her trust shrinking to her core team and Mendoza. She didn't flinch. Inside the sterile, fluorescent glare of the station's evidence room, Amelia meticulously cataloged the seized plunder. Kilos of meth wrapped in industrial plastic, stacks of US dollars reeking of greed, an arsenal of illegal firearms, and crucially, a thick, leather-bound ledger. Its pages were filled with cryptic entries, dates, amounts, and initials. Her finger traced a line, a substantial payment. The date, the day after her father's murder. The recipient's initials. VP cross-referencing the payroll list. The initials resolve into a name that stopped her heart. Victor Pena. Deputy Chief Victor Pena. He'd been on duty that night, assigned specifically to patrol the district encompassing the market plaza. The truth crashed over her with the force of a physical blow. Pena had been there. He'd likely heard the commotion, seen the chase, known exactly what was happening. And he'd done nothing. Worse, he'd taken a bribe, blood money, to ensure Antonio Vargas's murder vanished into the bureaucratic abyss. Confronting him in his spacious, wood-paneled office felt like stepping onto a stage for the final act. Pena was a bull of a man, his expensive suit straining over his bulk, his face a mask of practiced authority that now held a wary tension. "Lieutenant Vargas," he began, his voice an attempt at calm condescension that rang hollow. "This is a dangerous path you're walking. A reckless one. You don't grasp the forces you're antagonizing. Back down. For your own good." Amelia placed the open ledger on his polished desk, her finger resting on the damning entry. "I grasp exactly who I'm dealing with, Deputy Chief," she replied, her voice icy steel. I grasped that you were on duty the night my father was butchered in that alley. I grasped that you knew who did it, and I grasped that you took their money to look the other way while they erased him." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't just let him die. You sold his life for cash." Pena surged to his feet, his face darkening, the mask of control slipping to reveal raw, cornered fury. "You insolent little. You think your scraps of paper scare me? I weathered storms that would drown you. I've buried better cops than you for less." Spittle flew from his lips. Amelia didn't move. Not this time. As she'd spoken, encrypted copies of a ledger, along with her explosive affidavit detailing Pena's specific involvement in the cover-up of Antonio Vargas's murder and his systemic corruption, were already speeding towards federal investigators and an independent prosecutor appointed by the state governor. Pena was arrested at his desk that very evening, the spectacle broadcast on local news, his career dissolving into infamy. The trial that followed was an epic, grueling ordeal spanning months. It was a battle fought not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion and against a system reflexively protecting its corrupted own. Amelia took the stand. Her voice never wavered as she recounted the stolen bread, the desperate father, the alley, the blood, the years of systemic neglect and betrayal. She spoke of the flower seller's pity, the indifference of the original report, the long, cold trail she had followed. Salazar, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of life without parole in a maximum security hellhole, cut a deal. His testimony, delivered in a flat, remorseless monotony, confirmed Pena's presence and active cover-up the night Antonio died and named other high-ranking officers as recipients of Cuervo largesse. The courtroom gallery was perpetually packed, the city holding its breath. Amelia Vargas became more than a cop. She became a symbol, the woman who stared into Juárez's abyss and refused to blink. The verdicts, when they finally came, echoed like thunderclaps. Guilty, on all counts. Murder, racketeering, drug trafficking, extortion, corruption. For Salazar, for Pena, for their network of enablers in blue uniforms and suits. There was no triumphant cheer in Amelia's heart as the gavel fell. Only a profound, echoing hollowness, a deep weariness mixed with a fragile sense of closure. Justice, cold and hard, had finally been served, but it couldn't bring back the man who sang her lullabies. She visited the patch of barren, unmarked earth near the long-demolished warehouse where she and her father had huddled. Kneeling on the hard ground, she unclasped the tarnished locket, pressing the cool metal to her lips. Tears, held back for 15 years, finally spilled over, tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. "I did it, Papa," she whispered, the words carried away on the dry wind. "For you, for every stolen life they thought didn't matter." She placed a single, fresh white flower on the earth, a stark contrast to the surrounding desolation. But Juárez remained. The serpent of corruption had lost several heads, but its body still writhed beneath the surface. Los Cuervos would regroup, find new protectors, new avenues for their poison. The city's desperate struggle continued. Amelia returned to her desk at the precinct, her lieutenant's badge resting on her chest. It felt heavier now, imbued with the weight of her father's memory and the countless others who had no voice. The fight wasn't over. It was her life's work. The city had taken her father, tried to break her spirit, but it had failed. She would stand her post, a lone sentinel against the encroaching dark, fueled by a promise whispered long ago and a vengeance tempered into an unyielding resolve. For justice, for the forgotten, for the fragile dream of safety her father had died believing in, a dream she would defend one battle at a time until her last breath.